good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now in our 31st episode of 2025. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast. Well, a lot is going on in Washington. Last week, the White House released its AI action plan. And, we look forward to collaborating with agencies as they work to implement the policy recommendations in the plan, particularly related to streamlining permitting and infrastructure builds, where fiber connectivity will play a vital role in supporting AI and on the workforce development part. If you're interested in this topic, the Fiber Broadband Association is going to be holding a webinar tomorrow, July 31st at noon Eastern, on how do we solve the unappreciated fiber capacity increase needed between AI data centers. I'll have Mike Render, our top researcher from RVA, Jordan Gross from Lumen, John George from Lytera, and David Eckert from Nokia. So you can register on the Fiber Broadband Association's website under events. Kind of continuing on with what's happening in DC, at NTI, Ariel Roth has been officially confirmed as the administrator of NTI. So we congratulate Ariel on her confirmation, look forward to working with her and our continued collaboration with NTI. Speaking of BEAD, we mentioned last week that all 56 states and territories are now in the benefit of the bargain phase of the BEAD application. So all final proposals are due September 4th. So all those state broadband offices don't get a summer this summer. They're gonna be working their butts off. So continue to reach out to Fiber Broadband Association if you need any help on any of the processes in the states. In Congress, the House is in August recess, and the Senate schedule remains uncertain as they're hoping to move an appropriations package to the chamber by the end of this week to avoid the shutdown that comes September 30th, as well as confirm some outstanding nominees. Following the recess, the Fiber Broadband Association is awaiting further action from the House Appropriations Committee on the markup of the fiscal year 26 funding bill for NTI and is actively monitoring other broadband-related funding developments. Last week, the FCC unanimously approved the advancement of the long overdue reforms to the Commission's copper retirement rules. The Fiber Broadband Associations applaud the Commission's efforts to ease regulatory burdens and to support the transition to modern models. And then the FCC has its next open meeting on Thursday, August 7th, where they can consider an NPRM on revamping the NEPA review to accelerate infrastructure deployment, and the Commission will consider a notice of inquiry that would initiate an annual assessment on whether advanced telecommunications capability is being deployed to all Americans in a reasonable and timely fashion as required by the Section 06 of the Telecom Act. Well, this weekend, I'm going to be heading down to Buenos Aires for our third Latin America Regional Fiber Connect workshop this year. Well, I'm excited to spend time with our South American friends. I'm going to miss seeing many of you guys at Mountain Connect in Denver next week. Our good friends, Jeff and Doug, always put on a wonderful event, and sure that everybody will be anxious to find out the latest BEAD activities from the number of state broadband offices that will be in attendance. Once I get back from South America, I'll be heading up to Canada for our next North American Fiber Connect workshop in Toronto on Tuesday, August 19th. So I look forward to seeing you guys there. After August, we'll be in Spokane in September, Scottsdale in October, Kansas City in November, and then have our big premier member meeting December 8th and 9th in Palm Springs. Today on Five for Breakfast, our guest is Jim Martin, the CEO of Citynet, discuss bridging the divide in the Mountain State, Citynet's role in rural broadband expansion. Before I introduce today's guest, I'm going to introduce David Norris from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. We appreciate it. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor, Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, as participants, you are in listen-only mode today, but to ask a question, you can type it into the question box located in the control panel on the side of your screen, and we will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's presentation. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours, and you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to respond. We appreciate your input. With that, I will pass things back over to Gary to get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Dave, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest was Gaurav Junja, the Chief Operating Officer at Consolidated Communications, to discuss Fidium's transformation of New England's future with fiber. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of G's, and I'm very impressed with Consolidated's efforts on its fiber expansion efforts. If you missed last week's session, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is Jim Martin, the CEO of Citynet, discuss bridging the divide in the Mountain State, Citynet's role in rural broadband expansion. Jim is the president and CEO of Citynet, West Virginia's leading telecommunications and broadband infrastructure company. A lifelong West Virginian and entrepreneur, Mr. Martin launched his first company, Marcom, while still a computer science student at West Virginia University. Marcom quickly became a regional leader in internet service and web design and hosting. After its acquisition by Citynet Bank, alongside Charleston-based Citynet, Martin was named CEO of the newly formed company. Under his leadership, Citynet has grown into a dynamic, privately owned technology company with more than 250 employees, offices, and data centers in Bridgeport, Morgantown, and Charleston, West Virginia, additional data facilities in Columbus, Ohio, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Today, Citynet delivers an expansive suite of services, including ultra-fast fiber optic gig internet, advanced business voice systems, and managed IT solutions, and secure enterprise network, all powered by Citynet's wholly owned and aggressively expanding fiber network. Mr. Martin's been a long advocate, our leading advocate for broadband expansion and digital equity across West Virginia. He served on the board of the West Virginia Broadband Development Council and continues to work alongside state and local governments, nonprofit coalitions, and industry partners to bring fiber to unserved and underserved areas. So with all that, welcome, Jim. And for our audience, please type in your question to go. So with that, I'll turn things over to Jim.
Well, Gary, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for allowing me to join you today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And you kind of took a little bit of this wind down on my sail there. Thought we'd start off and give a little bit more of a background who Citynet is and kind of what makes us unique. And then I think what we'd like to do is talk about some of the unique partnerships that Citynet has formed throughout West Virginia. And then maybe wrap it up with what some of the challenges are that not only Citynet, but several of the other providers in the state are facing in trying to expand broadband throughout the state. So, just for a little bit of background for those who, may not know me, I am from West Virginia. I grew up in a little town called Beverly, West Virginia. I was very fortunate that I was able to graduate a little bit early, started at WVU when I was 16 years old in 1989. And then 1994, right upon graduation, is when I started my company, Marcom, that you had highlighted earlier. And then obviously, you mentioned we were acquired by a bank, but really the Citynet story kind of started off in 2001. The Citynet of today is when that was formed. And at that time, we were pretty much a dial-up and a web-based developer. But then in 2004, as our dial-up base continued to expand, we realized that, one of our biggest expenses was telecom, the phone lines. And so we were introduced to the opportunity to become a CLEC. And so in 2004, we registered to become a CLEC. We had an opportunity to buy several assets throughout the country. The first was a fiber network in downtown Columbus that later led to, we acquired all of the Adelphia Business Solutions distressed assets out of bankruptcy throughout the country, which then led to one of our great acquisitions was a company called AFN, or America's Fiber Network, that of all places was based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Great concept of a company. It was an asset for equity play with a lot of the public utilities where they would contribute fiber and had a vision of expanding across the country. That network was about 9,000 miles of fiber, spanned 13 states. And that really kind of introduced us to what is middle mile, which has always been a challenge here in West Virginia. So, what we did is, we actually ended up selling that entity, AFN, to a company called Zayo, which I think a lot of folks maybe on this call may be familiar with them. And Zayo has been a great partner of Citynet's. They're co-located with a lot of our facilities in West Virginia, and we actually utilize them to get to some of the key hubbing points for the backbone into like Columbus, Ashburn, and Pittsburgh. And that is definitely a challenge in our state as far as is the limitation of actual fiber to get into these larger metropolitan areas. But as time goes on, networks continue to expand. So once we after we did that sale, we kind of reshifted our focus back into West Virginia. And I think our first foray into the fiber market really was around 2015, where we partnered with our local community, Bridgeport, West Virginia, to do the first fiber to the home project in the state. And I'm a big advocate for public-private partnerships. And so what we did with the city, essentially they kind of provided the financing, and we agreed to build fiber to all of the homes in Bridgeport. And so that was our first fiber to the home. We later acquired a network in Philippi, West Virginia, similar type of network. And then probably in 2020 timeframe, so it was thereabouts, well, maybe a little earlier, is when some federal money started to come about. That was when CAF 2 or CAF 1, CAF 2, and some of these federal programs came about. And what I would like to do is we'll talk a little bit about some of these public-private partnerships that Citynet is engaged in. But I think one thing that I'd like to talk about is what makes Citynet unique is that, coming out of COVID, there was always a supply chain issue and issues that were out there. And so one of the things we decided, or we recognized and then decided, was that we didn't want to put our brand and our name in the hands of anybody. Meaning we didn't want to run a risk of a contractor maybe not fulfilling an obligation, different, whatever it might be. So what makes us unique is we do everything in-house. We have our own call center. That's a 24-hour operations here in Bridgeport, West Virginia. We do our own field engineering, our field surveys. We do our own construction. We are a soup to nuts on everything, and it really allows us to be dynamic and unique. It kind of separates us from some of the other providers in the region. But what is most rewarding for us is that we are very open to public-private partnerships. And as you can see on the PowerPoint that's on the screen right now, this is a list of active projects that Citynet is currently engaged in. And as you read down through the project names, and you can see the project, actually, I've got the title wrong. It says project total, but that's actually the funding source. So some of these projects are federally funded, some are state funded. And then whether the project is a private project, meaning directly to Citynet, or it's a public-private partnership. And one of the things that we really like about doing public-private partnerships, that's where, basically what happens is the public entity, whether it's a county commission, an economic development authority, a local city, they are the purveyor of the grant money or the funding source. And what we do is we come in as a partner, and we work with that public entity to find out what's the challenges they have, who are the constituents they're targeting. And then what we do is we design a plan, and then we execute on that plan. And then the win for Citynet at the end is not only do we get the customers up and the community or the entities happy, but then there's usually an arrangement where Citynet can then acquire that network asset for some monetary value at the end, because the public entities really don't want to be in the business of being an ISP. They just want to make sure that their constituents get connected. And so for Citynet, we really, really enjoy doing those types of projects. And one of the most recent ones that you can see on the screen is this Nicholas County ReConnect. It was recently announced, but I think we just got the paperwork in to kicking off that particular project. And, that was really a lot of work from the local county commissioners between Garrett Cole, Gary Roberts, and Craig Chapman. And obviously, our local USDA representative, John Reisenweber, were all instrumental in pulling that project off. So we're really, really excited to talk, about that project. But more importantly, I think one other thing I need to give credit to is some of our leaders in West Virginia. We've got, our Broadband Council, we've got Bill Bassett, the chairman of that, Kelly Workman, who runs our broadband office, our legislative leadership between our House Speaker, Roger Hanshaw, and our Senate President, Randy Smith, and of course, our Governor, Patrick Morrissey. But what we're going to talk a little bit here at the end of this is some of the challenges here in West Virginia. It has to do with pole attachments, and really need to give hats off to our Public Service Commission and our chairwoman, Miss Charlotte Lane. They're really, really embracing some of the challenges we have in our state and helping to kind of set things right so that we as a state can continue to move forward and expand broadband throughout the state.
That,
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Gary. I didn't know if I thought you might ask had a question there, but Dave, if we can go to that last slide. Not sure if we want to really get into some of the challenges in West Virginia is pole attachments by far is the #1 challenge here in our state. It's a hot item that's going on down at our Public Service Commission, and on the slide that's on the screen right now, there's several active cases that are before the commission, and the commission's actually made some very, very important rulings over the past couple of weeks on the first particular cases. And then Citynet, we just recently had to file a formal complaint against First Energy, who is the dominant power company here in the northern part of the state, and Frontier, who is a competitor. But the reason is that First Energy and Frontier are joint owners of the communication and the power poles here in West Virginia. It's just been a real challenge, not only for Citynet, but for a lot of the other providers in the state. And we're very fortunate our Public Service Commission is stepped in, and they're really taking notice to what those challenges are. And I think we're going to get some good rulings that are going to allow us to really start expanding broadband a lot faster than what we've seen in the past.
So Jim, on pole attachments, I mean, obviously that's a very contentious issue. That's probably the only issue I've ever seen actual fights break out in meetings between lawyers. They're not really good fighters if we start throwing punches. But how much of your network is deployed aerial versus underground?
Well, in West Virginia, we're challenged because of our terrain and our the rocky soil and so forth. So I would say the vast majority of not only Citynet's network, but most of the providers in the state's aerial, probably about 95%. It's just too challenging to put it in the ground. As you know, underground construction is about 10 times the cost, and it's very challenging when you go to hook up customers, both residential and business, because if it's in the ground, you got to get in the ground and bring it out or bring it in conduit to their location. And in West Virginia, most everything is aerial. So, aerial obviously has its own challenge with, storms and tree fall and things like that. But most of our network in West Virginia is aerial, which requires providers like Citynet to actually apply and gain permission from the various pole owners. And in West Virginia, predominantly it's First Energy and its affiliates in the northern part. And then American Electric Power is mostly in the southern part of the state, but they do have some assets in the northern part. But really the two power utilities are predominantly the dominant pole owners. And so we're all forced to work with them.
So what are the biggest challenges? Is it the cost per attachment, the ability to attach, the, where you are on the pole, the safety issues? What is the areas that are your biggest concerns?
Well, I'll tell you what's really transpired is, it's unique in West Virginia that you've got Frontier and First Energy are joint owners of the pole. So our competitor is actually an owner of the pole. Well, up until about 3 years ago, in the northern part of the state, it was kind of a common strategy in that the power company delegated to Frontier for them to manage the communication space on the poles. And so those that aren't familiar with pole attachments, generally it's a power pole. The top part of the pole is the power space. It's a very protected space. There's a lot of safety regulations in there. And so you have to have certain certifications to work in that space. But down below the neutral is the communication space. And so for many, many, many years, Frontier was responsible for the communication space. It was just kind of common in our industry that you would apply with Frontier, kind of set a shot clock for about 45 days, and then you would go start your construction. There wasn't really a lot of policing at that time. But as all this broadband money started to come into our industry, I think the power utilities started to recognize that their poles were getting a little bit overwhelmed, and there's a lot of liability that was starting to come about. And so about 3 years ago, the First Energy decided that they needed to step in and become the what we call the pole police. And unfortunately, they just really didn't understand what the rules and regs were around that. And so when basically the first challenge we've had is once we started applying with them is all of a sudden all these roadblocks were being set up. And more importantly, what they were doing was, and they still are doing today, but I think our Public Service Commission is about to fix that, is they are charging or holding the new attachers, these new ISPs, accountable to fix all the errors of the past. One of the challenges is that our poles hadn't been policed, so there's a lot of illegal attachments, a lot of safety issues that are out there. And so as a new attacher, we design our network, we engineer it, we identify all these pre-existing issues. And so at least in our territory with First Energy, they just basically, their position was well, these are problems of the past, but you've got all the money, so we're going to hold you to account. You need to pay for all this. And so it's been a pretty rough 3 years in trying to go, battle that, even though the FCC has made it crystal clear that new attachers should not be held accountable for errors of the past. But, having those battles back and forth, dealing with, who pays for this. And then once you get through that, the next challenge is getting the make ready done. After you've actually negotiated, you pay them all these fees up front for them to go fix the poles. And then there's certain timeframes that are dictated by the FCC and RPSC to get the poles ready so that we can go attach. Then all of a sudden, the work's not getting done. And then we ask for a temporary pole attachment so we can get on and continue to build, because as an example, if you have a 10-mile route and you got one pole in the middle that you're not allowed to attach to, well, your network can't operate. And so we even had challenges in trying to get temporary pole attachments with the pole owners. And fortunately, a couple of weeks, or within the past week, or actually maybe even this week, I think our PSC finally kind of threw their hands up, said, we're going to fix this. And so they've made a couple of rulings. One is they've implemented a new rule for temporary pole attachments, which just really hit the industry this week. So we're all anxious to see how that's going to play out. And then the PSC actually has made some rulings in the Comcast versus AEP case, in which they found the AEP was really in violation with some of the FCC rules. And we're anxious to see how that might cascade over into our case, and see what that will ultimately do to allow us, the providers that are trying to build out in the rural markets, to hopefully speed that up.
Hey, Jim, let's circle back to you guys seem to have perfected the public-private partnership model, and you've connected nearly 100,000 West Virginia families with fiber as a result of this model. How you mentioned that a lot of the times the public entity will want to give you back the asset or let you buy the asset. How important is that as part of your model, that you own the asset, or does it matter? How does, tell us a little bit about that.
From our standpoint, it doesn't. A lot of other ISPs, or especially the larger publicly traded, they want to own everything. From our viewpoint, we don't necessarily care one way or the other, as long as things are documented properly. But the reality is, at the end of the day, the public-private partnership's about getting people connected. And the nice thing about with the public entity getting the funds, they're in control. They hold the purse strings, and they hold us accountable to make sure that we service all of their constituents that were identified as part of that project. And only after every single one of their constituents has had an opportunity to purchase the internet, purchase service, and everybody's happy, at that point, there's a condition typically in our agreements where once that's all satisfied, we'll go ahead and acquire that asset, and then we'll assume all those liabilities that are associated with owning the infrastructure out in that public space. Because you generally a public, a county commission or an economic development authority, they don't want to be in that business. But what it does allow for is allows them to control the project and ensure that their constituents are served. So at the end of the day, do we care? Not necessarily, but I think from a liability and just operational, at the end of the day, we generally like to take ownership of the asset, because there's, as you can imagine, there's a lot of maintenance and a lot of work that has to be done on a regular basis. And so sometimes it's just a lot easier when you have that asset on your balance sheet versus someone else.
But, you know, one of the things that you guys have done a great job is leveraging a lot of these, in addition to state programs like federal programs like ReConnect. And now, you know, West Virginia was allocated $1.2 billion for BEAD. And Kelly Workman, your state broadband officer, delivered a plan to NTI this spring that had 100% of every unserved and underserved home and business in West Virginia to be connected with fiber. $200 million below budget, but that was kicked back. What do you think the outcome's going to be now after the new benefit of the bargain round? And are we going to see fiber throughout West Virginia, or something else going to happen?
Well, I tell you, I really need to commend Kelly Workman and her staff and the industry as a whole. You know, we've worked on this BEAD project for almost 2 years. And I'll tell you, West Virginia really has taken a leadership role in really trying to make sure that we met all the metrics that were required for BEAD and identifying all those households that are not served. So just for a highlight, you know, I would say right now in West Virginia, there's about 200,000 households that currently do not have broadband. Now, about 100,000 of those have been targeted through some of these other programs that are in place, as you saw on the previous slide. So about 100,000 are going to get service, but it might be over the next 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 years as we build out those various projects. So what BEAD left was about 100,000 households throughout West Virginia that had no funding source, nothing to get broadband to them. And when BEAD was announced, West Virginia identified all those. And I mean, it was a lot of work to go through every individual house, because you can imagine those households are really in remote areas. And so we were real excited that West Virginia was one of the leading states to be able to submit its application this past spring. And as you know, there's some changes at the federal level, which to an extent we actually compliment. So what we were asked to do over the past couple of months was all the providers were asked to go back, look at the BEAD areas that they were awarded, and identify what are really high cost households or target locations. And what that means, like if you look at the economics of our BEAD program, it's about $10,000 a household is what's being allocated when you do all the math. Well, there might be some households that are about 2-3 miles down a dirt road. And that could be 100,000 plus built just to get to that one household. And I think the federal government and even just, those in West Virginia are kind of questioning, is that really a good way to spend our money, taxpayer money, to get to that one house when there are alternative technologies that may not have existed 5 or 6 years ago, especially with the companies like Starlink and their low Earth orbital satellites. And as mobility has expanded, there are other options for people to get connected. And so what we did as a state, we identified those high cost areas. Each provider turned those back in, and then our broadband office put those out, made those available to the alternative technologies to allow for them to come in and bid. We have not heard the results of that yet. I'm expecting that the broadband office is going to probably be making some announcements here in the near future. But one of the concerns that the state has, especially our U.S. Senator Shelley Moore Capito, we really need to make sure we keep our eye on the target, and we've got to get fiber out into these rural communities. We're challenged because we don't have fiber out into these rural areas. And so, even though a Starlink option might, provide immediate relief to these folks, it doesn't take care of the long-term aspects of economic development and growth. And so, we have a lot of unincorporated areas in West Virginia. It's probably a cluster of households. There might be a gas station. You might even have a Dollar General, but it's unincorporated, right? It falls within the county purview. And, that community is never going to really be able to develop if it doesn't have some good core infrastructure in there. Having satellite is great, but you're not necessarily going to get that core infrastructure. And so we, as a state, and again through Senator Capito, we're really pushing hard on the NTIA to allow us as a state to use our BEAD money to really build out some good fiber infrastructure. Additionally, one thing to note is we do have very limited cellular coverage or mobility coverage in our state. the populated areas, our highways are covered, but in those rural areas, there's not. And it's a really remarkable for us when we go out to serve these customers. I mean, they're literally still working off of copper landline. That's their only means of communication. There is no cellular. There's nothing available to them. And so they're, one of the things by utilizing BEAD to build fiber out, it's going to allow for more cell towers to be put up, which then provides another means of connectivity. So it's not just, fiber. There will be mobility. You've got satellite. And so one of the things you'll always hear me say is I love competition. I think competition is the greatest thing that could ever happen in the business space, because it holds everybody to account, right? And makes sure that you deliver a better product and a good service. Otherwise, they're going to switch. And so we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. But I'm very hopeful that our state's going to be successful in petitioning the NTI to allow us to use a good chunk of our BEAD money to build fiber out to these rural communities, while at the same time recognizing these high-cost areas it should be made available to these alternative technologies. And I'll be honest, Starlink is a great product. We actually have to put it on some of our vehicles while we're out in the field, because that's the only means of communication that we've got. And I've actually had a few discussions with Starlink, and I think there might be some opportunities to partner with them. Because,
well, Jim, listen, really appreciate the great success that CityNet's had, and we look forward to seeing. We're big fans of Kelly Workman and everything that's going on in West Virginia. Hope that you guys agree with you that you got to get fiber out there if you want to have good wireless connectivity. Anyway, look forward to seeing what happens here on the next coming months and years on getting fiber connected throughout West Virginia. So thanks for sharing. And I hope everybody can get back together next Wednesday. We're going to be talking to Andrew Butcher, the president of Maine Connectivity Authority, discuss how driving connections, local lessons from the road to broadband expansion. So we'll see you next Wednesday. And thanks again, Jim. We'll see you guys later.